Hey everyone, we are back again, and today we're going to be looking at the development module within Lightroom 4. Yay! So here we are. I'm in Lightroom. I am on the development tab, and these are all the tools you get to use to develop your photos. Now, if you are familiar with Camera Raw as part of Photoshop, then this should all look very, very similar, just laid out differently. Literally, Camera Raw and Lightroom use the exact same tools. It's just different layout, that's all. So if you know Camera Raw, then you're good to go. Don't even bother watching this. You're awesome. If you don't know Camera Raw, then we're going to start at the basics. So this is a photo I already developed. This is up in the Catskills during fall this year, past year. This is my already processed photo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click this. I'm going to create a virtual copy. So instead of like making a copy of the file, what I just did is I made literally a virtual copy, a fake digital copy. And you can tell it's a digital copy because that little thing right there, the little corner that's folded up. Now if I right click this, go to development settings and reset, we're going to now see what this photo actually looked like when it came out of my camera. So this is actually the raw file. Can you tell the difference? Yeah, very, very, very drastic change. Now, because this is nice, pretty fall colors, where I'm going to probably start with is this bottom tab, camera calibration. When you shoot raw, in this case I was on a Canon camera, it embeds the basic settings of your camera. For example, in Canon, I could have shot faithful, landscape, neutral, portrait, or standard. I don't know Nikon's off the top of my head, but I know they have the camera vivid option. And when you take a picture with your camera and look at the back of the screen, what you're seeing on the back of the screen is actually like a pre-processed mini JPEG version. And that's why a lot of times when you take raw files or raw photos, they don't look like they did on the back of the camera because guess what? They aren't supposed to. On the back of the camera, you saw a JPEG pre-rendered version, and here we're seeing the actual raw file. So the very first step you want to do when processing your raw file is select a camera calibration that will better match what you're doing. These are technically labeled for certain things. I honestly think it's a crapshoot. Sometimes the camera portrait will look better on a landscape than the camera landscape. So it just depends, and sometimes it's a matter of knowing your camera to know what looks best. In this case, let's see here. Camera faithful. In this case, I think I like camera portrait better than camera landscape. Camera landscapes is definitely bringing out some of the oranges a little bit more, but I really like the red tone. So I'm going to stick with camera portrait. And you can manually adjust the kind of settings and all that kind of fun stuff, but there's no real reason to in this case. So where you want to go next after you get your camera calibrated, for me anyway, is I always go to lens correction next. In this case, this is a wide angle lens that I was using. So there's going to be a little bit of vignetting, and there's probably a little bit of warping. So if I select Enable Camera Profile, I'm going to select a Canon because I was using a Canon camera. It's going to automatically see, watch this. If I unclick this, see, notice how it bubbles? See how, look, it almost looks like there's a little bubble right here, right? Boom, it fixes that. It's just what happens when you shoot with a really wide angle lens. In this case, if I had a horizon line, I could go over here and I could rotate to get to where I want. If there was something wrong with if it was really warped, I could fix the vertical axis. Maybe I need to straighten the trees out so they're not so curved and so forth. And okay, obviously I just really screwed up the photo. But here's something that's really cool. If I double click a name, it's going to reset the slider to the middle. Or if I double click the slider, it's going to reset that slider to the middle too. So if you need to do that kind of stuff, this is normally where I go ahead and do it. Is I go camera calibration, lens correction, And then I'll go up here towards basics, and sometimes if I need a crop, I'll go ahead and crop it now. This is the crop tool, this little guy here. I can kind of pick where I want and then crop it. Very basic cropping, so if you know what a crop does, it's not too complicated. But here's the cool thing. If I click the crop tool and go back, guess what? I could recrop it. So cropping isn't permanent like the old versions of Photoshop used to be. In fact, the Photoshop of CS6 kind of steals Lightroom's crop tool. So if you know the new CS6 cropping in Photoshop, then you should be fine with the Lightroom's version of cropping. Within cropping, there are a few tools. I could use this. It's a horizon tool. Let's pretend, just for the sake of today, that this line right here, the curve of the road, was actually my horizon. And I wanted to straighten my photo. I could click here and drag it along the line, and Lightroom will automatically make that the horizon line. Obviously, I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to double-click angle, and it's going to reset. But that's very common, very popular way of fixing a bad horizon line, is just using the straighten tool. Another one is you could manually do it this way. You know, just kind of line it up with the grid and so forth. But in this case, we're not going to bother. Double click that bad boy. Double click. Let go. Put everything back to normal because I like my cropping on this. I'm okay with my cropping. I crop in the camera all the time. So anyway, now we got our camera calibration, we got our lens correction, we got our cropping right. Guess what's next? White balance, which is the very top of the basic tab. There are multiple ways to white balance. In this case, I shot as raw, so I could always go in and check out all these different settings. Let me go to auto. Auto kind of brightened up these leaves a little, warmed it up. Cloudy. It's not cloudy, but it makes it really red. Sometimes that's nice for bringing out like a fall color. Let's look at shade. Shade's getting a little ridiculous. Fluorescent. Fluorescent's going to be crazy. Yeah, that's not good. So I can manually select these presets here. I'm going to go back to my shot. I can use these sliders. In this case, you know, I know I'm going to want to warm it up, so I'm going to give it some red. I'm going to give it some yellow. So I can manually control it here with the sliders. I'll reset those. Or I could grab the eyedropper and pick a neutrally gray area. Neutral gray. I'm looking for a neutral gray. That's a little white. Let's look at that. Nope, that's not a neutral gray. That was a bad pick for neutral gray. I'm really bad at picking neutral gray. The only time I'm really good at picking neutral gray is if I have like a gray background. Oh, there's a rock. That's pretty gray. That's not bad. So that's just another way to select your white balance. In this case, I'm going to go back to as shot. And I'm going to skip white balancing for right now. I'm going to come back to this after I mess with exposure and a few of these other things. So this is the histogram. I use the histogram all the time in Lightroom. It's basically a map of where your information is. This is the blacks in your photo. This is your shadows. This is your basic exposure, the levels of your basic exposure. This is your highlights, and this is your white. So if I go down to my exposure, you know, i.e. I'm brightening the whole photo, look what it does to my histogram. Right now, it's very dark, and where's everything? Everything's over in the blacks. When I bump up the exposure like crazy, so everything's all white and washed out, where are all the levels? Oh, everything moved toward the highlights and whites. So the histogram is just a nice tool to make sure you're not losing information. And in fact, if I click this little triangle here, and this little triangle, these will warn you if you have clipping, i.e. you're losing information from your photo. The red means I'm clipping out, which means there are literally no pixels in the sky now. They're just washed out. Here's the reverse. Well, that's kind of freaky. If I drop my exposure all the way down, the blues mean I'm now clipping and there's no information in those pixels. So it's just a nice little warning system, and I'm going to bump my exposure, trying to get the point where I have more whites, but it's not washed out. And none of this is solid. It's one of the nice things too about Lightroom is that chances are I'll probably get a quick basic setting for the exposure. I'll mess with all this, and I'll probably come back and mess with exposure a little bit more. That's just how it works in Lightroom. For now, let's just go ahead and stick with that. Contrast. Everything always needs more contrast. I love contrast. Contrast is like my BFF. I'm going to put it up just a little bit for now, and we'll probably come back to that. You can see I'm starting to clip now in the shadows, and that's okay. I am okay with clipping in the shadows. Why? Because every photo needs black. You should have blacks in your photos. The contrast is nice, so I'm okay with having really dark shadows in a few places. Next up is highlights. These two, the highlights and the shadows, are two of my favorite sliders in Lightroom. Watch my highlights. If I move this down, it darkens my highlights. If I move it up, it washes out my highlights. See, look at the sky. So this slider only affects the bright areas of your photo. You can see that on the histogram. Watch this area on the histogram. When I move the slider, it moves back down. When I move it up, it moves up. So in this case, I'm going to pull it down pretty low. I'm not going to go all the way down with it. I'm just going to go to right about there. Shadows work the same way. You pull it down, it's going to darken the shadows. Pull it up, it's going to brighten the shadows. In this case, if I move it all the way over, it's starting to get an almost HDR look. So I'm going to pull it back just some, because again, I do want some blacks in here, you know. I do want some shadows. I do want some contrast. So we're going to leave it right about there. Whites and blacks are pretty new to Lightroom. They're kind of like the equivalent of levels in Photoshop. If I move this, notice my histogram, it's moving my white point of the photo. Same thing with black. If I move this, it's moving the black point of the photo. You want to know a cool trick? A really cool trick on how to use these? If you hold the Alt button on your keyboard and then select it, it's going to show you where you're peaking, right? So right now, those are all my hot spots in the photos. Those are the places where I'm going to be losing... Actually, hold on. Let me turn my clipping off. What was that? So these are my hot spots where I'm losing pixels, right? So if I back it down, I'm not losing any pixels anymore. If I move it up, you can now see where I'm losing pixels. I'm losing pixels all on there. And look, the sky looks all washed out. That's not pretty. In this case, I'm okay with the... I'm going to check it. Yeah, I'm okay with a few places with the little baby pixels being blown out because I don't want to drop my levels too much. Let's check out blacks. So right now... Wait, where are we? So this is... right now, I don't actually have any blacks, right? So I'm going to keep pulling it back until I start to see blacks. In this case, remember, I like shadow. I do want some contrast. So I'm going to pull back just a little smidgen more because I do want some darker regions in here. All right, it's a little bit too dark. So now I'm going to eyeball it and move it back up. Clarity. Clarity. Best way to think about clarity is that it raises the contrast of edges. So in a way, it almost makes the picture look sharpened or more detailed. So when I slide clarity all the way to 100, it gives it an almost HDR look because it's bringing out the detail of all these edges. And the opposite works the difference. Other way too. If I move it backwards, it's going to soften all the edges. It's going to soften the contrast of all the edges, which will give it a very almost glowy, faded look. Clarity is an awesome tool and very useful for a bunch of stuff. Today, I'm just going to eyeball this. So I don't want it up all the way. That's just a little too ridiculous. I like it right about there. I think that looks good for me. I'm happy with that. Vibrance and saturation. Let's go with saturation first. Saturation is what? It's the levels of all your colors. So very overly saturated, no saturation. I almost never use saturation unless I'm pulling the saturation down a little or all the way off. What I use is vibrance. Vibrance is basically like saturation's older, cooler brother. Vibrance looks at the levels of all your colors in your photo, and when you move it up, it takes the darker color saturation and matches them up to the level of what's already bright. So it doesn't affect the bright colors. Like, for example, look at these reds right now, right? Look right there. I guess technically I could zoom in to make it easier for you. Alright, so watch. So these reds right here are probably one of the brightest reds I have in the whole photo. And when I move the vibrance slider up, they did shift a little, but not to the extent, I mean, oh my gosh, look at the sky. Watch. Look how the sky got so much more blue, and how these yellows came out so much more. It's because these two areas were already dark, and it brought out the colors. But because the colors in these reds were already pretty bright, it only barely affected them. So the vibrance is awesome. I'm just going to slide this up. I'm eyeballing it. I don't want to go too crazy, because then it starts to look like, oh my gosh, what is this, oversaturation? Technically, I could go too crazy and then drop down the saturation on it too, but that's not really what I want. What I want in this case, this photo, I really want to match the brightness and vibrance that was really there the day I took this photo in the mountains. So I'm just going to eyeball it to where it is. I think it's probably right around there. Yeah, that's too much. And look what it does in my blue skies. That looks bad. I think right about there for this case. So now that I've gone through all these bad boys, I'm going to go back to my exposure. I told you I might do this. I'm going to bump up the exposure slightly. I'll bump down the contrast just slightly. Once I'm done with my basic tab, in this case, I would probably go to the hue, saturation, and luminance. And we'll go there in a second. But normally what I would normally go to is the details. I'm going to zoom in. I hit the space bar to zoom in. And this is my sharpening and my noise reduction. Oh, sharpening. Sharpening is pretty powerful in Lightroom 4. Just because what they've done to the math or algorithms, whatever behind the scene is much stronger than it ever used to be. On top of that, I'm working with raw files, so it's even better. So sharpening and noise reduction are great in Lightroom 4. I'm going to bump up my noise reduction, because you can tell I have some noise. Problem with as I bump the noise reduction up, what are you guys noticing? I'm losing some sharpness. So guess what? I'm going to have to bump up my sharpening whenever it lets me do that again. It's thinking about it. Alright, there it goes. So I'm going to move my sharpening up, and I'm just eyeballing. I'm watching here, and I'm watching over here. In fact, I could technically zoom in even further. But I don't really like zooming in that much. Normally when I sharpen, I'll probably end up anywhere between 30 and maybe 80 at the extreme. And I wish I could tell you like, oh, well, always sharpen to this or always sharpen to that. But honestly, it all comes down to the actual photo you're working on. So there's no set, this is the perfect number you should always have for sharpening and the perfect number you should always have for noise reduction. Because it's really going to depend on the photo and your camera and the light and all that kind of stuff. In this case, I think it's probably good about 70. I do have some noise coming in again. So what I can do here is I'm going to hit the masking. The masking is nice because when it sees details and colors that are similar, it doesn't sharpen them. So it makes it so it's really the edges that become sharp, but these middle areas smooth it out. So you have less of those pixelizations. And I think that's good for what we're doing now. Wait, let me go back. Something I've not shown you yet about the development tab is you see how there's a name here and an arrow you can open and close them. See this little clicker slider thing here? If I click that off, it's going to turn off this whole thing. So now this is my unsharpened, unnoise reduced photo. Turn it back on. There it goes. See the difference? It's very, very different. Maybe you need your screen set to full screen and 1080 to see it, but trust me, there's a difference. I'm going to zoom back out. Now, I mentioned before that I do want to hit up the LS... I'm dyslexic. the HSL tab. There's hue. We can affect hue. So let's say I want to take my blues. I want my blues to be more green. I can do that. I want my yellows to be more orange. Actually, in this case, I do want my yellows to be more orange. So we're going to leave that there. My orange is a little bit more yellow. No. Oh, my orange is more orange. So that's what hue does. Basically, it lets you adjust the hues of the colors. Saturation, I can pull down just the saturation. So now look, my reds have no saturation. I can make it so my blue has no saturation. So if for some reason when we're doing vibrance, if there's like one color that was overly vibrant, instead of dropping the saturation of the whole photo, I can come down here and select a different channel or color to do it separately. Luminance is nice. It kind of adjusts the brightness of a color specifically. So let's say, watch those reds. I can brighten those reds a little, or I can darken them. In this case, I'm going to brighten them, or I'm going to brighten them just a little. My blue sky, I'm going to darken it. No, I'm not. I'm going to lighten it. No, I'm not. Hold on. Reset. I'm going to lighten it just a little bit. It wasn't really a rich blue. It was much more of a traditional sky blue, so it was too dark for what it was. So that's what the HLS does. You can obviously affect the colors individually here, which is the color tab, or we could switch to black and white and adjust the brightness of the different colors. But we're not worrying about that because that's too much of a whatever. There's tone curve. Honestly, the contrast works so nicely up here that I find almost no reason to really use the tone curve. I'll still use the tone curve in Photoshop every now and then, but in Lightroom, I honestly never bother with this. But it works just like any other regular curve. You can pick your spot, you can pull, you can do all that kind of normal stuff. So what else haven't gone over? Split toning. Sure. Say I wanted to make my photo split toned with red and blue. So now the whole photo is all red or all blue. That's how you would do split toning. Effects. Effects are nice. This is a vignette option. What in the world did I just do? Oh, the split toning is still working here. Let's turn that off. That was weird. So effects. So the vignette. Let me make an extremely vignette. Vignette's darkening your corner. It's very overdone at times. You'll see photos or portraits are like this where literally you have black corners for no apparent reason. But what vignettes are nice for are helping draw the eye into a photo. It helps keep the eye away from the edges. So in this case, I'm going to make mine extreme real quick. I'm going to get my midpoint. I'm going to adjust my roundness a little. I'm going to feather it out. That way it's a smoother transition. And then I'm going to reset it and slowly pull it down so I think it's okay. So watch, this is the difference. Boom, boom. In fact, I think I went a little bit too far with it. I'm going to pull it down a little more, or up a little more. So just a nice little subtle change just to help draw the eye into the photo. Nothing too crazy. So those are the basics of development module in Lightroom 4. There are a little bit more advanced stuff that we'll go over. So let's do that now. Excuse that, guys. It's just an email. Nothing important. Up here, you have other tools, right? This is the crop tool. We went over that. This is normally a blemish removal tool or spot removal tool. This probably isn't a good photo to demonstrate it on. But let's do that anyway, because I'm too lazy to switch to another photo. I'm going to zoom in. So let's pretend, I wish I had a spot to remove. Hold on, I'm looking for a spot, guys. All right, let's pretend this is a spot, right? The way the spot removal tool is that you want to get the brush about the size of whatever it is you're trying to cover up. You click it, and then you drag. So I want to cover that up with blue sky. And it does it. Except for this case, it didn't. There it goes. Wow, my computer's just really lagging today for some reason. And that's how it works. You know, if you have dust, you need to remove dust from the sky. Maybe there's an annoying bird, or you're editing someone's face and they have a blemish or a zit. Just click it and drag. And it'll cover that up for them. You know, click. And drag. So the spot tool is very, very basic and to the point. If you want to get rid of these guys, I can click on it and then hit the delete button. Click, delete, click, delete. Oops. I re-clicked. It will never end. Click, delete. So that's the spot removal tool. Red eye tool, I've honestly never used this. So I'm guessing, look, drag it to the center of your eye and then click. Oh, and just might, I'm guessing it adjusted the saturation or things like that. I've never used it. The gradient tool is sometimes useful. My problem with the gradient tool is that if you watch me draw this, the gradient tool is straight, right? See, it's straight. Like 70% of the time when I'm out and I take a photo, my horizon line is not going to be straight unless I'm at the water, at the beach, or something like that. You know, normally there's a hill or something that's going to get in the way of the sky. So when you have a straight horizon line, the gradient tool can be useful. In fact, let me just switch photos real quick. So here's a photo, right? This is obviously an already edited photo, but it doesn't make a difference. I'm going to grab the gradient tool. I'm going to grab the gradient tool whenever my computer decides to work again. Click and drag. Let go. So what I can do with the gradient tool is, so far, everything we've done in Lightroom has been a global adjustment, right? So if I adjust the exposure, it adjusts the exposure for the whole photo. If I adjust the contrast, it's the contrast for the whole photo. What the gradient what the gradient filter does and the adjustment brush do is they let you do local adjustments. So in this case, the gradient filter, I'm adjusting everything from the top up. So for here, I'm going to pull it down, and I'm going to try to pivot it. So now my gradient filter is only affecting the sky. In this case, the exposure is at 4. Like, watch. If I reset my exposure, there's no change to the photo. But let's say I want to drop the highlights of the sky. Well, if I come over here, it will slightly adjust the highlights. Notice the blue just got a little bit richer. You know, maybe I want a black and white sky. I don't know why I would want a black and white sky. But if I want the grayscale sky, look, I can pull my saturation down, and it's only affecting this area. And this little middle ground is just a nice slight transition to help feather it in. So I do use the gradient tool, but I use it very, very selectively. Like, I can say that maybe 1 in 15 photos do I actually use the gradient tool. If you're unhappy with what you want, you can click it and just delete it, and it gets rid of it. Let's go back to the photo we were working on together. Any day now, computer. So there is the gradient tool I already did before to demonstrate, and I decided that was a bad demonstration. So what I want to do to get rid of it, have my gradient tool panel open, go to it, click it, and delete. And it goes bye-bye. Hold on, I'm closing out programs real quick. See if that helps. So, another tool we want to go over is the adjustment brush. This I use on almost every photo. It allows you to do a localized adjustment wherever you brush it. I normally always have mine automatically set to exposure -4, so that way I can see where I'm drawing. In this case, there's an auto mask. It's checked on. I'm going to turn this off for this demonstration, and I'll show you afterwards what it happens when it's turned on. So I'm going to brush along this path. And that was a horrible brush job. I'm going to shrink my brush down. What I'm doing right now is I'm scrolling on my mouse to shrink the brush. I could also use the brackets buttons, or I can go over here and manually adjust this size slider. I'm just going to slightly adjust this area. I'm going to switch to the erase tool. Because I was so sloppy before, I'm going to clean up this because I really only want to adjust this path area. Wow, it is really lagging today. What in the world's going on? Alright, so I have erase selected. I'm just going to slowly erase out what I did. We'll call it a day. We'll just pretend that's it. That I got what I wanted. So once I have an area selected, I can, again, just like the gradient filter, I can manually adjust just that local region I brushed in. In this case, it's the path. Alright, so with this path, what do I want to do with this path? Adjust my shadows down a little. No, the other way. I want to bring up my shadows a little. And here's the thing. I'm running 16 gigs of memory here, so it's not like I'm skimping. There we go. So I'm slightly adjusting that. I'm going to bump my exposure slightly on it. I'm going to drop my highlights on it slightly. And what I'm doing is just basically trying to lighten this area so you'll now have this nice leading line that's going to bring you deeper into the photo. For the sake of this tutorial, I think you get the idea though. The adjustment brush allows you to paint different exposures, contrast, highlights, and so forth onto specific areas of photo, and it's very, very, very useful. What's really nice too is that I can go over here and hit close. It will close the adjustment brush. And if I want to come back to it, let's see if we can do it, or is it going to lag me out? It's going to lag. If I want to come back to it, I would just have to adjustment brush again, and I'll see this little pin. All I have to do is just hover over the pin, click it, and one, it'll show me the masked area I have painted over. And two, it'll allow me to readjust the settings. If I want to add another adjustment brush, because a lot of times you'll do that with a photo, maybe I'll adjust the sky, we all adjust a building over here or something, you want them all different settings, you just click the new button and it'll allow you to make a new adjustment brush. The auto mask is really nice. I can't really do anything right now, but if I could do things, what I would do, an example of that, the photo of we just looked at a second ago with the sky, if I have auto mask selected, let's see if I can see how there's that little minus sign right now because I'm on my erase. There's a little plus sign. Well, anything that plus sign goes over, like, all right, there we go. See how there's a plus sign, a circle, and then another circle. Well, when you have auto mask selected, it will smartly determine what the edges are. And if you don't go over an edge with the plus sign, it won't affect that region. So I'm going to drop my exposure down real quick to demonstrate. So watch, I have auto mask selected. I'm going to paint in the sky a little. Oh, man. This is going wonky now, right? Just going to slowly paint. And see how instead of the outside circle, like technically all of this part should be colored dark, but it isn't because the auto mask is saying, hey, you know what? Those reds and those browns aren't what's in the center region. The center region, the plus sign is only touching blue, so I'm only going to affect the blue pixels. And that's what the auto mask is, and it's actually pretty darn powerful and pretty useful. Not so much in this kind of photo where I don't really have like a smooth skyline, but if I had a smooth skyline or water line or the side of a building or something, I could quickly mask it out in one quick swipe as opposed to taking the time slowly trying to get all the edges nice and even. And that's it. Those are the basics of how to develop within Lightroom.